Hi, this is Dr. Nazare coming back to talk with you about psychological things, psychological topics, and again, sharing with you some of my original ideas that I'm very happy to be able to spread to more people because they're not necessarily available out there in any kind of book or any kind of psychological training, because there are ideas that I've come to as a result of my work and my thinking and my own way of putting things together in my mind. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to recap. I'm going to do a little summary of the topics that we have done up to this point and to give a little synopsis of what those things are. You're, of course, always able to go back to it and look at them again, particularly if there are new ideas that you've never heard before. It is easy to forget or easy to not get all the points if they're new ideas. So it would be helpful if you want to understand it better to go back and look at it again. They're what can call, evergreen. In other words, evergreen, like with plants, that this is something that stays helpful to inform people and educate people across time. You can always go back to other episodes. So I'm going to be actually looking at them because I forgot what each one was about. But let me begin. So the first episode I did, which is episode 1, was talking about the difference between what is logical and what is psychological. And I was making the comment that when you don't understand somebody, when you throw your hands up in the air and you say, I don't know what's going on with this person, I don't understand why they're doing this or why they're thinking this way or why they're not doing something, to remind yourself that perhaps the reason that it doesn't follow logic is because it's psychological. And then on that episode, I explained to you that one little trick that I came up with of differentiating between the two is between the what and the why. So the what is what you can actually see, the behavior, the moving of a table, the things that have been said, right? But the why is why the person is doing that, and I reminded you that that is something that we cannot immediately see. Which brings me to the second topic, which was about having impact on others. And on that episode, I was talking about that most of us have not had the grace of having parents who have the skill and the ability to be very aware of impact on other. And there I was talking about the psychology that's called mentalization, which is one of the areas I have been trained in the Anna Freud Center in London, and which is something I learned after my doctorate degrees. But it's something that's very helpful and not very commonly known in the United States or in general, because it's kind of an extra way of looking at things that has 3 pieces. So one piece is the ability to recognize the impact you have on others. The other one is the ability to imagine why other people are doing what they're doing. So in other words, other than coming to one conclusion and thinking that that's the truth, it's really an act of imagination when we're thinking of the why, to remind yourself that there may be other reasons the person is doing that. So the ability to consider the various reasons why a person may be doing or saying something having to do with their psychology. And I emphasized on that episode that we have a tendency to think that others are like us, but actually they're not. And sometimes they're a little bit like us. And then we make a bigger mistake thinking that because they're a little like us, they're a lot like us, but they're not. So to remind ourselves of the various reasons that a person might do something was something that I talked about in relation to mentalization. So this one is about recognizing the many reasons another person may be behaving or talking in a certain way. Impact on others is the first one. And the last one is to consider that why you yourself are doing what you're doing. Because minds are opaque was the topic, meaning that we cannot really see into other people's minds. But interestingly enough, we cannot see into our own very well either. So sometimes we think that we're doing something for one reason, and later in time, we realized that we weren't doing it for that reason. So maybe we moved to a particular house thinking that you wanted the location. And later you realize that it really was the lighting in that house that really made you want to buy that house. That's a silly example, but for now, it's just a little summary of that. Then I talked about the kind of person that one has experienced in one's lives, or that it's yourself, but usually it's somebody who, originally to this idea, I used to call it the battered person syndrome. You might have heard of the battered wife syndrome. This is, there's no such thing as the battered person syndrome. I made that up. But I was using the concept of the battered wife syndrome because the characteristic is that the person is with somebody, is relating to somebody who is clearly treating them poorly, abusing them, sometimes physically, but emotionally, psychologically. Remember, in my episodes, I'm focusing more on the psychological, emotional maltreatment, and that somehow this person is unable to stop the person from treating them that way, to talk appropriately to them about stopping, and they're not able to leave the person. They continue in the relationship. So in that episode, I talked about this phenomenon of these people that are unable to protect themselves, and that when we talk to them, I mentioned that they may agree with us, they may think our ideas are good and they want to follow with our ideas, but they cannot. And there I talked about two factors. I talked about that one factor that creates such a person is that they endured in their childhood a lot of maltreatment. And of course, as children, we have not much we can do. So if a person has endured a lot of maltreatment growing up, they are kind of accustomed to it, habituated to it, and they're not quite able to notice when somebody's treating them poorly and know that's wrong. They do feel it. I want to remind you that I said that the person does feel bad, but they don't have in them the alarm of somebody's treating me poorly and to be able to say that's wrong, don't do that. And the other factor was that these people who grow up to have this particular difficulty in life, which is very sad because they're unable to protect themselves. The other factor was that when they did protest as children, as teenagers, or as adults, they were usually rejected and blamed. So one way that they could do that is that you protest about maybe not being treated fairly, and the person calls you selfish, or they call you, they tell you only think about yourself. You always want to get what you want. So instead of being heard and tended to and recognized for whatever legitimate protest they're making, they're actually put down, rejected, blamed, perhaps even hit. So those are the two characteristics for people who have that difficulty. Then I talked about anger in the next episode, and I was talking about the difference between healthy anger and unhealthy anger. And healthy anger, I want to reiterate, is the anger that is protective. And it comes in, I've also told you in that episode, this fascinating phenomenon, which is that emotions don't last more than seconds to minutes. And I, of course, recognize that whoever's listening to this is going to think that's kind of nonsense. My feelings last a lot longer. Well, I want you to know that actually emotions truly only last from seconds to minutes, and that when they continue, they are fueled by our thoughts. This is something I will elaborate more at other videos because it's a very important concept. But I want you to know that anger that is protective happens in the moment and protects us by saying, don't do that, stop doing that. And again, that if the person doesn't stop and continues, then what we can do is remove ourselves from the situation. And that anger that says to the person, this is wrong, don't do that. If you continue, I'm going to hang up. If you continue, I'm going to leave. If I'm going to continue, I'm going to leave the room. That is healthy anger that stops the person from doing something that is hurtful or affects you in a negative way. So that is healthy anger. Unhealthy anger, one of them that I explained to you was repression. And repression is anger that has been repressed in development, in childhood. And so the person doesn't have a lot of access to their anger. And that kind of anger, unfortunately, is unhealthy to oneself because it actually makes you sick. So you could have, typically you have autoimmune problems, and other physical problems, because if you recall, in that episode, I was talking about that emotions follow in complete parallel to the immune system. And they're completely interconnected. They're completely interlaced. The physical world and the psychological world are not two different worlds. They're completely interconnected. In relation to the immune system and to emotions, they are interconnected. So we don't use our emotions for their purpose. And their purpose is to protect us from things that hurt us or are harmful to us, and to welcome and take in those things that are good for us. So somebody we love, we want them near, we want to hug them. Somebody that is treating us poorly, we want to move away, and we want to have healthy anger and tell them to stop. So that was the other unhealthy anger. The other one that I mentioned that already people have told me they've used and has been helpful is the anger that you do not express in the moment, but you may express in the moment, but not in a healthy way. Not to say to the person you need to stop because of X, but that you keep ruminating about what the person has, what has happened with that person, and you keep feeding your mind with negative thoughts about what had happened. And I told you in that episode that typically when we're doing that, the anger, not only does it not go away, it continues, making us sometimes more and more upset. But also, we may not realize, but if you analyze when that happens, you're usually looking at the situation as if you were a victim. This is a problem because when we feel like a victim, we're powerless. So clearly, there's nothing we can do. The other problem is that we are actually fueling that anger, and anger is literally bad for us. Things such as cancer is exacerbated. The cells that we normally have in our body have more likelihood of propagating. Heart disease, high blood pressure, these are things that happen in our body as a result of being angry. Not the other one, not the one about repression where you don't feel it, but the one where you keep fueling it forever. And lastly, I talked about narcissistic injury, provoking narcissistic rage. This is not anger, it's rage. And it is very unhealthy. And in this case, what happens is that the person feels devalued by the comment, and it's a matter of ego. It's actually not healthy for many reasons. But one of them is it's all about being built up as an important person. So with narcissistic rage, what happens is the person makes some comment or takes some action that makes you feel injured in a narcissistic way, meaning that your sense of bigness is dropped lower, devalued. And so what happens to a person with a narcissistic injury and developing narcissistic rage is they go on to plan how they're going to retaliate. So narcissistic anger is always about retaliation. It's always about getting back. And because in narcissistic anger you feel humiliated or devalued, you actually aim to humiliate or devalue the other person. So that was the one on anger. And then after that, the last one has been about the criticism club or the criticism sensitivity. And there I was talking about that it's a problem of misinterpreting information and having a tendency to think that comments that are given to you that are actually to guide you or to correct something or because somebody's talking about a preference, you actually take it as if it's a criticism. And here's somebody calling that I need to open the gate. Let me do that. Hello? That is funny. Okay. You take it as a criticism, but in fact, it's actually oftentimes aiming to help you or help you correct a problem or help you become aware of something that causes you some problem in your life. And then on the next episode, I talked about the contrast between being sensitive or being part of the criticism club, as I called it, or being literally criticized. And to end that, I talked about that in the situation where you end up misinterpreting and feeling criticized when you're not, what is missing is that you are misinterpreting intention. So you actually think that the person is doing this X on purpose to criticize you, to put you down. And I also talked about that usually people who have this characteristic of belonging to this club, as I call it, they tend to feel attacked. So they often say they feel attacked. And then depending on the severity, they can actually use very violent language to describe what they think has happened. Like you're badgering me, or you're cutting me down, or you're knifing me. It could be very violent language. On the other hand, I talked about real criticism, and real criticism, their characteristics is that it doesn't aim to help you, so intention is different. But how do you know? It's hard to know, right? So you know because, number one, the tone of voice. The tone of voice is different, and it's aggressive when it's criticism and not constructive. The second thing is that it tends to not be specific, because the constructive criticism is specific because it aims to help you. And oftentimes it tells you how you could do it differently. It gives you guidance. The unhealthy criticism or destructive criticism doesn't try to help you. So they could give you a list of things that are wrong with you according to them, your flaws, and not give you any ideas to how to make that better. The other thing is that in constructive criticism, there's empathy. There's care for the person. So they're usually interested in your experience, interested in your feelings, and interested in your particular context. With plain criticism or destructive criticism, there is no empathy. So one characteristic is those people are not particularly interested in seeing your point of view or your experience. Another particular is that they tend to be character traits. So they bring you down by calling your character, calling upon your character like it's faulty or defective, calling you selfish, calling you lazy, using the word never or always, telling you you never remember anything. Those are like character attacks. So real criticism attacks your character, and it also attacks abilities, like you never clean up, or you never take care of the car, and you are never able to remember, or you don't remember all the time. Things like that attack your ability. You're stupid. Just came to my mind. So that is the difference between the part where you are inappropriately, inaccurately misinterpreting motivation and the actual language that is being used to you, versus real criticism. So now this is the summary of the different things that I've talked about so far. I want to tell you that I'm going to be taking a little pause on doing videos. I am not stopping. I am going to continue. In fact, I just got started. So don't worry, there'll be more coming up. But this is to announce that I am going to be taking a pause on making videos until the end of September, and then I will pick up again. Make sure to make comments and ask questions, because I will be looking at those things, so that every video that I come to do in the future, I will pick up a comment or a question to address that too. Last thing I want to say is that if you've enjoyed this episode, if you are learning from these videos, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe, because I am trying to grow an audience so that more people learn about these ideas and get help navigating their lives and navigating relationships better. And if you want to know when I get a new episode, if you do something with that little bell, you get notifications, so you get told that there's a new episode. So that's it for today. I hope you're having a lovely day. I hope you're having a lovely evening. I hope that you can use these concepts to make your life better and to understand other people better. And I will see you soon.